Can everybody see me? Can I see everybody? Yes, I think so. Hello, hello. Welcome to you all. Welcome to our second Climate Solutions Conference here at St Gilgen. It is a bit warmer than yesterday, I'm very pleased. It was a little bit cold at the barbecue yesterday, but well done, it stopped raining. So, and thank you, Gabriel, for all you did, and Jakob. We have 6 schools here today, students and staff alike, and we're really, really happy to welcome all of you here. I would ask you one very important thing. We are 6 different schools, we have staff, we have students, and I would love you all in the sessions today to all kind of forget that you're staff and that you're students. Let's all work together. The idea of this conference is that we get the most out of it if we are sharing our perspectives, sharing our different ways of viewing the world, and working together to find as many solutions as we can. So let's just all sit, all muck in, take part. Thank you. I want to just share this with you before we get started. This is Climate Dad talking. I'm sick of people treating my concern about climate and ecological collapse like it's my hobby or something. I'd much rather be thinking about other stuff. I don't know if some of you feel like this sometimes. I certainly do. Climate change is a massive issue of our time. The fact that we get really involved and discuss it and talk about it isn't just because I've got nothing better to do. It's because it's the most important factor of our time. And in 5 years' time, I hope, we will all be back here thinking about other stuff, doing those other things, because we can. But just at the moment, it's massively important, so what are we going to do about that today? This is really the overview of how today is going to look for all of us. We will be here for about the next hour, setting the scene for the day. That does not mean I'm going to be talking at you for an hour, don't worry. We will then be playing Climate Bingo, thanks to Gen B for bringing that with us, to get us into the mood for going into our sessions. So we will then have 2 sessions before lunch, and at lunch we will be having donuts for a very good reason. The session after lunch is going to be run by the Donut Economics group, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. That group session will be in school groups, but for the other sessions you will be in your groups of endangered species, as you may have seen. You have all been assigned, apart from Florian, you can go to whichever one you like, groups, and we would ask that you remain in those groups, because the idea is we work together in teams, and you are split between different schools as well, so you're mixing with different people. We will then come back together into those groups to have a sort of a final planning session. What now? What do we do next? But nobody is allowed to leave the conference until we have escaped the conference. And thanks again to Gen B for setting that up, a kind of an escape game to set us on our way. So where do we begin? We are in a climate crisis. That's why we're here. We know that. What is a crisis? A crisis is the point where something either gets really bad or it gets better. The Greek for crisis, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, has an element of change in it, Vendepunkt, a turning point. If you are really, really ill with a fever and you're lying in bed and you are it's either going to get, when it gets to the crisis point, you're either going to die or you're going to get better. It is that change, that turning point. The Chinese for crisis has 2 different symbols, and the first symbol is risk, danger, and the second symbol is opportunity. So what I want to do today is just remind us that we are sitting now at a point where we have huge opportunity. But let's just remember a couple of things. I'm not going to tell you about the bad news today because we know the bad news, that's why we're here. Just a few updates. Parts per million is how we measure the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know it's on this upwards trajectory. We know we need to break that curve. In March last year, we were at about 425 parts per million. Now in March this year, we're about 428. We are now over 430. So you might see some people signing off their emails with their parts per million number. That's where it comes from. What we want is we need to go and see that coming back down into the 300s, even preferably under that. It's going to take us a while to break that curve, but that's what that number means, and it's very important. The other thing that we've become more and more aware of is how much those tiny tenths of a degree count. The Paris Agreement said 1.5 if we can, 2 if we can't, but we weren't really aware of exactly how much of a difference that made. It makes a huge difference. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees warming is 1/3 worse. So every heat wave will last 1/3 longer. Now, that doesn't mean that 1/3 more people die. That means that a lot more than 1/3 more people die. Because if you've been in a heat wave for 2 weeks, the chances of making it the 3rd week is pretty low. So we need to be aware of those 1/10 of a degree. If you're got, for example, there are fruit trees that will remain, they will stay alive at 2 degrees, but they will stop fruiting at 1.5. So they will stop producing what we need them to produce. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees is a great deal. If ever you think, what's the point? That's the point. And one last thing I just want to share with you in terms of awareness is these stripes. Have some of you seen those stripes before? Do they mean anything to you? On the front of the climate book, for example, those stripes. The Reading University created these a while back just to raise awareness, really, to show in an iconic fashion what does it look like, temperature change. And lots of people took them on. They painted buses in this. They've got ships over pedestrian crossings using these. But what the group, Hawkins et al. At Reading University, looked at just recently, they said, oh, we need to update this a bit. So they've moved it into this. You can't quite see the colours so well from here, but what this is now is a slightly different 3D version, if you like. This line in the middle is the Earth's surface. So now they're looking at the ocean and up into the atmosphere. And what it shows us is that at first, the global warming was mostly happening up in the upper atmosphere. That's where the heat was really pulling together. Now, and in the oceans, it remained relatively cool. The oceans were absorbing the heat, and they were able to absorb quite a lot of it. Since about 2000, we've had a real shift in pattern. So since about 2000, you've got the oceans heating up hugely, the lower atmosphere heating up a lot. And that means when you hear about the weather systems that are changing, the extreme weather events, that's why it's happening. You've suddenly got warmer oceans. You've got hurricanes happening that weren't happening before. This is why. So that kind of iconic vision is a very useful thing to have, and we need to be using these sorts of images to raise awareness of what's going on. Why do we need to raise awareness? Because what we really need is for people to behave differently. The only way we're going to win and break that curve on the carbon dioxide is for people to behave differently, for people to change what they'd seem as the normal kind of behaviour. So we're going to have a little look at what needs to change, who can change it, obviously. I'm looking out at you. Are you on your own? No, you are not on your own. But in terms of change makers themselves, the most important change makers are here in this room. It is you. All of us at some point think, what's the point? Other people aren't doing it. Why would I do it? And when that happens to you, when you think that, please can you try to remember this slightly complex photograph here. Now, if you're familiar with Mandelbrot's fractals, this will mean something to you. It is this idea of this replication. So when you have a conversation with your neighbour or your parents or your friends, when you do something to be a kind of a role model, to role model good behaviour, what you're doing is doing something that can be replicated by other people. Something on social media will be seen by somebody else. And all of that replication builds into a slightly bigger bubble, that builds into a bigger bubble, and it's all part of this. This comes from the science of climate change behaviour. And that is an image that I'd like you to remember. Why are you doing it? Because it counts. But it's not just you doing it. Lots of other people are involved, and if you forget, please remember, corporations, there are a gazillion corporations around the world that are involved in change, in good change. And I'm starting with banks, and there's a good reason for that. In the 8 years since the Paris Agreement, the world's top 60 private sector banks poured 6.9 trillion into the fossil fuel industry. So if you are somebody who is saying, I want to help the world, help the climate, help the planet, but you've still got your pension fund in a bank that is funding the fossil fuel industry, you are actually, this is counterproductive. So we need to kind of think about where we're putting our money. And there are some fantastic green banks, putting all the money in the right place. Triodos and Alternative Bank are just 2 examples. But it's really hard to know which banks are the best ones. So what one group of people have done, they are financiers, they are bank managers, they have decided to get together voluntarily to create Bank Green, which is like a website that you can then go to check. You can go and put your bank in and say, how green are you? And then you'll find out. I did, unfortunately, put in Austria, and nothing came up. So there's a bit of pressure still to be put onto the Austrian banking system. But this is a good place. And these people who are behind these are doing it because they think it's important. And they're not old men sitting in sheds or tie-dyed wearing hippies. These are financiers in the banking sector who are doing this. So please never think you're on your own. There are massive corporations who are also doing really big things. There are smaller corporations doing good things. there's this sunset company, for example. They are a company that take all the old messed up fishing nets from coastal fishing villages. They recycle them into carpets. Their carpets are 100% recycled fishing nets. They then help use some of their profits to help those coastal communities. That's a great thing. So everybody who owns a company can make those right decisions, and a lot of people out there are already doing so. And if you haven't already got Ecosia as your browser, your default browser, please do. Ecosia plants trees, and it is fully run on renewable energy. There is also, Informiac is also a place where you can have green cloud storage. So if you want to make sure that instead of using fossil fuels to run all the cooling on the storage that is storing all of your information, there's also websites that you can use to get around that too. There are also organisations. Now, that's not the same thing. These organisations are not there to make a profit. They're not there to make money. They're there to help us. The Carbon Tracker, for example, is run by an environmental lawyer, John Lang. He works in the financial markets, and they are looking to see and show and prove to us how the financial markets are affected by climate change and how they are affecting climate change. They are making things more transparent in the banking sector. That's really important. Net Zero Tracker is a little bit different. They are looking at all the countries who've said they're going to get to net zero by a certain year, and then they are saying, well, how well are they doing? And they're kind of giving us an idea. So again, it's making it transparent. It's making us all see what's really happening. Net zero cities. 112 cities in Europe have said they're going to be net zero by 2030. We're now 2025. That's pretty impressive. These guys are helping them get there. And of course, once they get there, when we can use them as an example. But please remember that it isn't just corporations and organisations. There are people behind the corporations and organisations. These are individuals who use their energy all the time to make these changes in whatever their expertise, whatever it might happen to be. Rudy Unschauber at the top there, you will see a little bit more of him later on. He's our Austrian politician who is showing us the way to net zero. Christina Figueres, who pushed through the Paris Agreement. Now, she is a lady who had an enormous amount of energy in 2015, and she still has an enormous amount of energy now. People like this are changing our world. Please don't think you are on your own, unlike this guy. Posting about it on LinkedIn is not bad, but it's not going to make the world change. There are also politicians around the world who are also making very, very good changes, so let's not think that the politicians are the bad guys. Teresa Ribera from Spain, De Silva in Brazil, they are the environmental ministers pushing for good change. And we now have in Canada the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who was the governor of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada. He is also the UN Special Envoy on matters of finance and climate change. So there are some really important, big guns out there. Let's not think the world is all led in the way that some big countries currently are. But what is really, we've got people driving us to change our social norms. We've got companies helping us to drive our social norms. Behind it all is this idea of storytelling. If you think storytelling stopped when you were 5, it didn't. Storytelling is all around us, is what helps shape us and our behaviour these days. Storytelling is Hollywood films. Storytelling is books you read. Music lyrics that you listen to, it's social media. It's everything that's around us. All the time we are being shown what we could be doing, how we could be doing things. So storytelling needs to do 2 things. Firstly, it needs to show us the path to net zero. What might it look like for us to get there? What's that going to actually be? Because if we can't imagine it and we can't envision it, we can't do it. So it needs to show us that. It also needs to demonstrate just sustainable behaviour. If you watch TV and everybody is doing the recycling fantastically, the chances are you're going to think that's the norm, and you're going to do the same thing. So we can demonstrate social behaviour through that. What we need is for Hollywood to stop giving us all of this. It is failing us. Hollywood is showing us dystopia, it's showing us how the end of the world is going to come, and it isn't showing us all these wonderful, great things that we could actually be doing. So we all need these ideas, these stories to show us this vision of the great things and the fun things and how life can really be. Things are beginning to change. I don't know if you've met Kulu yet. Kulu is a pangolin, and Kulu is now on Netflix. And Kulu the pangolin is not a documentary about pangolins. Kulu the pangolin is a documentary about Kulu. And you can't watch Kulu the pangolin without really, really caring about Kulu by the end of the film. And it changes a little bit how we react to nature. And if you think I'm talking rubbish, there's been a study recently where a set of people were shown a short video about New York, and a set of people were shown a short video about nature. Then they were both given a video game, like a computer game on fishing. And the first lot fished everything in the first year and had no fish left over for the second year. They'd been watching the New York documentary. Those who'd been watching the nature documentary for just a few minutes didn't fish all the fish in the first year, the majority of them didn't fish and they left a few fish over for the next year so they could fish again. Now, if that can really be, if a 3-minute documentary can really change the way we think about things, then it just shows us how important storytelling can really be. Imagine if you watched Friends, and Friends never used any single-use plastic. Imagine if Big Bang Theory, when they go out to go and get their takeaways, imagine if they all said, oh, hang on, I'll just go and get my Tupperware, and I'll go and take that with me. Imagine that. Imagine if in Outer Banks, everybody had electric scooters. It might sound like the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, but there are many people behind this. I read a very good paper about it, and I thought, okay, well, that's great, but it's just an academic paper. Who's written the paper? Cheryl Sleen had written the paper. Cheryl Sleen works for the creative media for a more sustainable world, but actually, since 2 years, she has now been the Netflix sustainability creative content person. So I wonder whether that's why we're seeing Kulu the pangolin coming along. So there's already being built into Hollywood. It's being built into our storytelling. The other guy, Daniel Heinefeld, who wrote the paper, is in charge of this consultancy, Rewrite the Future, and he is going around helping all of those screenwriters to put sustainability behaviour into their stories, into their TV series that we all watch, which means that what we're watching, and we think then that sustainability behaviour is the norm, and that's going to change the way we all behave. Neuroscience shows us that actually if we watch something, we begin to practice it in our heads. So neuroscience is beginning to say if you're watching NBA, you're actually almost, your brain is rehearsing those moves. And we are then getting better at that behaviour, whether we're getting better at MBA or sustainability behaviour, we're getting better at it simply by watching it. So it's not all rubbish. We can also learn from books. We can learn from films, we can learn from TV series, we can learn from books. Now, I don't know if any of you have read this book. I think one of you may be really quite familiar with it. Kim Stanley Robinson writes science fiction. It's quite big, and it's quite small print. It's a very, very good book. Before I read this book, if you had said to me, what does the path to net zero look like? I'm not sure I could have answered it. Now, I've got a much better vision of what that path might look like to get society as a global level to a place where we are, where we need to be. The Ministry for the Future sets out the ideas, and I don't agree with all of them, but I certainly now know better what I do agree with and what I don't agree with. For example, he tells us that it starts with a heat wave. It's a very, very painful beginning. A heat wave in India that kills hundreds of thousands of people. Now, at that point, India then says, do you know what? We've waited for you to solve this problem all of this time, and you haven't. So what we're going to do is take matters into our own hands. We're going to fire aerosols up into the air. We're going to pretend that there's been, simulate a volcanic eruption and cool the planet. We don't really know what that's going to do. We don't really know, but we don't really care because we've come to that point. So it starts there, and then maybe that's going to be a moment that happens. It also shows how China leads the renewables change. China leads the financial change, and the way things are looking just at the moment with our tariffs, maybe that is going to be exactly what happens. Maybe that's what China's being pushed into because the markets for China are now going to be elsewhere than maybe they were going to be before. They introduced something called the carbon coin in the book, and the carbon coin is a fantastic idea. If there's somewhere us bringing this in, this is great. If you are a farmer in Africa and you're about to chop down all your trees to make money, lo and behold, you come and get a carbon coin instead. You don't chop your trees down, you get money to save the planet. So there are different ways, and he brings in all these elements. He also brings in a lot of eco-terrorism. All of the planes on one day are blown up out of the air because they are not using SAFs, sustainable aviation fuels. So in the book, people are then terrified of flying unless they're flying in a green manner. And so a lot of people are then flying in airships. And so it shows us the way, maybe that's the way we're going to go. So what we need are storytellers that show us all of these different elements so that we can begin to think, hey, yeah, maybe that's a part of how the future could take us. So what I really want us to do, we need to begin not to fear that having less or having a slightly larger, smaller house or not earning quite as much. Maybe what we need to remember is that actually if we haven't got quite such a big house, maybe we've got a lot more urban green space. Maybe we've got other places we can go that's better. The commons are the commons again, belong to us all again. Maybe there's less social pressure to conform. Maybe there's more flexibility within our working day. Maybe we have more fulfilling jobs. What we are aiming for is flexibility. We are aiming for contentment. And we're aiming for joy. That's what we want to get to. The good news is that 80% of people, there are lots of different types, the More in Common is actually a global place. This is just the German one I was looking at. There are 80% of people care about climate change. But the even better news is that almost 100% of people care about nature and think nature is fabulous. This was in my garden the other day. I literally waited about a second to get the photograph of the bee on the flower. There were just bees everywhere on this beautiful flower, and it makes me just so happy. Nature is excellent, and luckily most people think so. So, for example, we've got sunset dappled. We could have photographs of ski touring in the fresh snow around here, the sunsets. We all love it. We love spending time on the beach with our friends in nature. So what we need to really be doing is just rethinking our values, isn't it? Rather than, if you had an option, shall I go and buy another pair of jeans, or would I rather spend the day at the lake with my friends? I know what I'd rather. And probably most people, we do need some jeans. We need some things to wear. We don't need 6 pairs. So there's this kind of question of reassessing those values, what we really want out of life and how to get there. And our futures. So what we want right now is not necessarily, we're thinking about maybe when we get that bit older, what do we want? Do we want a bigger house, more cars? Or actually, do we want to just have a bit more fun outside with our people that matter to us? Like these girls. It's not just going to be storytelling that gets us there, though, is it? It's going to be laws. We do need laws to be behind it all. So in the USA, for example, recently, the entire New York postal fleet needed renewing. So they decided 2 years ago to use diesel-engined fleet for the entire fleet. One environmental lawyer took them to court. She won. Sued them. They now have these slightly strange looking, but they are electric vehicles, so they are now replacing their fleet completely. And how many people did it take to make that massive, massive change? One environmental lawyer. So never think that you can't make change. Switzerland took the Swiss pensioners took the country to court. Switzerland now has said 2030 it will only be using 50% of the greenhouse gases it used in 1990. So that is set in law. Korea didn't set a net zero target, and the Korean people took Korea to court, and Korea now has a net zero target. So people have legal power. We can fight. But why have I got a picture of a lion on here? The other thing to that is that our environmental lawyer in America said, do you know what? We can't win everything. There's no way we can win every case, but if we don't win a case, let's lose really loudly. Rather than just saying, that's a shame. No, let's go out there and use that to raise awareness of how wrong that was so that it isn't the same next time. So whose responsibility is it going to be to make all these changes? Question first, who here feels agency? Who feels like they can make a valuable change to the world themselves? This side of the room. This side of the room feels like some of you. This is great. You can. Is feeling agency the same as feeling responsibility, the same as feeling agency, and is it your responsibility? And whose responsibility is it? And how do we balance it all out? Let's just have a little look. And I don't want to talk about this for long, but it is something that I just want to mention. Carbon footprint calculators are a really good way of working out how I can take agency to change the things that I can change. So if I know which bit of my lifestyle is causing the most emissions, I can begin to reduce that. However, these were, of course, created in the first place by the fossil fuel industry, because it suits the fossil fuel industry to make us take responsibility and to take it off them. Is that right? Of course it isn't. When we're looking at responsibility then, let's have a little this is a picture actually of energy use, of all of the things that we do. We forget sometimes that stuff is one of the big things that we actually should be reducing. So our energy, the energy input into cooking water and so on, is actually eclipsed by the amount of stuff we have and the amount of stuff we buy. So if we had less stuff, that would already be a very good thing. So is it our responsibility to alter how we live? Yes, to some extent it really is. We can make the right decisions. Should we carry the full responsibility? Hell no. Are these guys perhaps helping us to see who are the bad guys? This is a Carbon Majors, this is a database, and they put together every year, this was April's database, showing us who the real bad guys are in the world, who are causing the most greenhouse gas emissions. Over 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions since pre-industrial times can be attributed to just 78 companies, ever. So is it up to us to change, or is it up to them? Is it just the rich people? Is it a rich-poor question? In 1965, when you looked in the US, the people owning the companies in the US earned a maximum of 30 times more than the lowest paid worker. That was 1965. Now, the difference is 300 times. So if you have a worker in your company who earns 1,500 a month, then this person is earning 450,000 per month. Give or take a bit of tax, okay. That's still a lot more. So are we really, as a society, saying it's okay to value one individual who has had maybe some really fantastic opportunities over another person to that extent? This guy decided that wasn't fair. This guy said, no, that's not all right. He's called Dan Price. He started this group called Gravity Payments, made a lot of money through this company, was bringing home about 1.1 million a year, buys a big house, gets a bigger car, that's all good. Decides though, and he goes for a walk with one of his friends who says, I've got 2 jobs because I can't actually live, I can't really pay for my kids unless I'm doing more jobs. He says, hey, that's really bad. So he's in Seattle and he says, okay, so maybe what I'm going to do is make sure that everyone in my company at least gets what you need in Seattle to lead a decent life, which he decided was $70,000 a year. So he puts his workers all on a minimum salary of $70,000, which means that he himself puts himself on $70,000 from 1.1 million. He has to remortgage his house. All these there was 1/3 of his workers doubled their pay overnight. And 2 of his senior he left the other ones on their previous salary. He didn't reduce theirs. But 2 of them left anyway, said this is unfair. The other ones who stayed are having a lovely time because these guys are obviously working now much harder than they ever did because they feel so grateful and it's all very happy and everyone's very happy. And so he's one example of someone who has made a decision about making the world a better place in the way that he can. He hoped that lots of other people would do the same thing, and they haven't. But what we can do, a bit like Dan Price, is make the right decisions. Now, John Patton makes this point very well, and I think it's worth repeating. Every purchase that you make is a consumer vote. Everything that you do, every bank that you choose, everything you buy is a vote in itself. If you demand green, you will get green. Supply and demand. You can demand the things, and that will then change what is supplied. There is this issue, there is a thing, tipping points. We know a little bit about tipping points. We know about the bad tipping points. Bad tipping points are the planetary boundaries. Are we over some of those? Yes, we are. We're over 6 of the 9 tipping points that Rockström has set out. So there are some really bad tipping points, but the one bit of good news is that there are some good tipping points as well. I'll show you this image here. It looks a little bit complicated, don't be too worried about it. It shows us really that there are 6 social tipping points. One of them is education, and we will look at some of those. But what I really want you to do is understand what a social tipping point is. So I'm just going to show you. This is a social tipping point. The thing about social tipping points is that you think, like with the civil rights movement, for example, you end up with needing everybody to change and everything to change in order to make that change happen. But social tipping points don't need that. So if you make things a little bit different, you behave a little bit more, you are beginning to shift how people behave, but you can't see it. Nobody can see it. Nothing's changing. Nobody moves, nothing. It all remains the same. And everybody does these little things, and everybody thinks it's pointless, and there's just no point in me doing this. Why am I doing it? And the thing is that at some point, you've tipped over the edge. You have tipped over the edge, and that is the social tipping point. Thank you. Social tipping points function at sometimes 10 to 15% of the population only. You don't need everybody making that change in order for the social tipping point to be successful. So social tipping points are an incredibly fast-acting thing. Just look at Tesla sales, if you don't believe me. 1 quarter last year, first quarter last year to first quarter this year. 60% reduction in sales in Germany. Now, things can happen fast, and that's society talking. And changes, big changes in the environment, is that really going to happen quickly? Well, these images, this is Utrecht. You can't quite see it probably, sorry. It's a bit unclear for you. The top image is Utrecht in the 1980s, motorways underneath. If you look at those church towers in the top left, and you see them down here, that's what it looks like now. We can make massive changes to make the world a much, much nicer place. Do I want to get on my bike and cycle there? Of course I do. Or China, that in 2008 had a fast-speed rail network that looked like that on the left. And now in 2020, it looks like this. So we can make incredibly quick and fast changes when we want to. But what we really need to think then is, well, how do we get to 20-0? Do we have the Ministry of the Future kind of option in our world? Or how do we really get there? And what I want to do with you is begin to build up a little bit of an image about what that might be. So I would invite you all to look underneath your chairs. You have one of these and one of these. Hopefully, it has a blank side. On your whiteboard, I'd like you to draw a nice wiggly line. And I would like you to write 2050 at one end. And now at the other. Now we're going to get some artists coming along, aren't we? So it looks something like this so far. I'm going to give you 10 elements, and we're going to try and place them on our timeline. And we'll all put them somewhere slightly different, and then we'll run through them. So the first thing I want you to try to decide where this is going to go on your timeline is the invention of a carbon neutral gasoline, like a fuel that you can put into your car, but it is totally carbon neutral. When do we think that's going to be invented? When's that going to come on the market? Ready for number 2? When are we going to, I say tax the rich, but all I'm talking about is adding 2% to the tax for the very rich. When are we going to add that 2%, and then we can use that extra money to end poverty and to fund climate justice in the global south and make sure that everybody has a decent way of living? When are we going to do that? Number 3. Currently, there are currently 4 state offences. Genocide is one, crimes of aggression. Ecocide is not. And one of the reasons why ecocide is such an important thing is that if you take the head of Shell to court currently and say, we're taking you to court for crimes against the environment, currently he will say, Oh yeah, but if I hadn't done it, someone else would have done it. So don't blame me. If ecocide becomes a crime, a state crime, then he can't say that anymore. Shell actually have to change the way they run their business. So that would be the benefit of making ecocide a state crime. When's that going to happen? Number 4. When are we going to say we're not going to use any rare earth minerals in all of our devices until they are fair trade? We are only going to use fair trade rare earth minerals. We are going to make sure that the money, the profit stays in those countries where they are extracted and that those people are looked after. Number 5. When is there going to be a green shipping agreement, making sure that we get to 2050 net zero for shipping? Shipping that carries all of our stuff that we are buying. When is that going to happen? I'm wondering if we have a positive and optimistic room or whether we have quite the opposite. Number 6. This is going to be a big one. If we can get majority voting at COP instead of unanimous voting, so if to get the decision at the end of the Klimaweltkonferenz, the climate conference every year, if we can make that decision a majority voting decision, we will be moving to get forward much faster. When will that be? Number 7. When are we going to ban all of our private jets? Although, admittedly, depending on what you wrote for the number 1, we might not need to. Yep. Number 8. When do we have 10 climate neutral cities? Remember what I said before, when are we going to have those? Just 10. Now I'm going to move on to migration. Number 9 is going to be, we know that there are a lot of people who are going to be living in places that become unlivable, that are already becoming very unlivable. So there becomes, we're going to have a resettlement, a sort of Umsiedlungsstrategie, like a resettlement program where Chad, Mali and Senegal have the opportunity to send people to learn the language, to be trained, to be given all options of integrating in Canada, Sweden and Germany. When does that begin? You're moving to Mali? Yeah, quite. Although we only got 1 plane, didn't we? Let's face it. We didn't do well with that. I'm trying to keep him out of this. Done quite well so far. Finally, I should be interested to see what you write for this one.
This is assuming that we'll still have elections.
This is hoping that democracy prevails. This is, oh, John. Although. But there are benefits to benign dictatorships. It's just the benign bit that we want to bring in. Ladies and gentlemen, who is feeling relatively optimistic? Who's feeling not quite so optimistic? What? Okay. In front of you, you do have a map, a timeline, a roadmap until 2050 of some of the elements. We would need quite a few more to cover all of them. I'm just going to run through them briefly. And the good news is with number 1, it already exists. Synhelion is a company that is using solar energy to synthesize a carbon neutral type of gasoline. It's the kind of fuel we can put straight into our cars, straight into our aeroplanes, and it is being created by the sun. Is it being created at the right amount yet? No, it isn't, but it already exists. So all it requires is those banks and those corporations, those fossil fuel giants, to step away, perhaps, from some of the other investments they're making to move into these kind of investments. So there's number one. There was some good news. Tax the rich, you decide. Ecocide, you decide, but the sooner the better. Rare earth minerals. Number 5 was our green shipping agreements. I've got good news there too. That's already happened. It happened last month. About 3 weeks ago, they signed it. And the really good news, especially for Mr. Patton here, who is feeling a little bit negative about democracy right now, is that...
Even America. No.
No, absolutely not. It's quite the opposite, obviously. We had a whole group of people, this is obviously the global community getting together. They are having a discussion about this. And Saudi Arabia was so convinced that people would vote against this that they pushed for the vote. Saudi Arabia says, we're going to do this vote. Saudi Arabia votes against it. The USA votes against it. The Yemen votes against it. Iran votes against it. But not many other people did. 16 countries voted against it. 68 countries voted for it. So when I then come to that section about majority voting at COP, we already have a bit of proof that if you can get people together, get the global community together, you will have enough weight behind you to make the right decisions. So there is some joy to be had in this democratic system of voting, even though some countries will always push back. Private jets, maybe we won't need them because we've got synhelion, perhaps. Maybe that won't be quite so important. The 10 climate neutral cities is likely to happen in the next 2 years. So we've got places like Copenhagen and Amsterdam that are very much leading at the forefront, but let's not forget cities in Bhutan, Costa Rica. Let's not forget the rest of the world that is actually showing us, and we're not being quite open-minded enough yet to see exactly where the good stuff's happening. So let's just... very much. Then we have Mina and Leah over here. Mina and Leah will be running, they've taken quite a big leap into something that most A-level students at the moment also don't yet look at in terms of economics. We're looking at different ways that we could actually set up the whole economic system. That social behaviour change is only going to be possible with some pretty grand changes, and we're scared of them, but we don't need to be scared of them. Mina and Leah, do you want to say anything about what you're going to be doing? Should we leave it at? We're happy with that. So Mina and Leah are going to be running that session, so it should give us quite a good idea and enter you into the conversation, really, that we're then all going to be using after lunch. Now, after lunch, we are joined by Carolina Escobar-Tello. When I Googled the top 100 people who are currently influencing climate policy, the first one that comes up, the person who is deemed globally to be currently influencing climate policy the most, is a lady called Kate Raworth. Kate Raworth wrote this book, 2017, about different ways of setting up our economic systems, different ways we could be running economic systems. Does it mean living in a cave? No, it doesn't. We can do it very differently, but we can look after the planet at the same time. Now, what she used was this idea of the donut. So just briefly, if you're not familiar with it, those tipping points that I was talking about earlier, Rockstrom's tipping points, she looked at those tipping points and said, well, hang on, there must be a way of using this, and what can we do with it? So the tipping points are all around the edge. But what we also need as human beings is clean water, fresh air, shelter, warmth, food. And so she looks at all of those things that we need and says, but somewhere there is a safe operating space. We can all have what we need whilst the planet isn't destroyed. There's a place there for us all to have what we need. How do we get there? So that donut is what it's called, and they have only 6 people in this donut economics group of people who are going out helping the world to work out how to do this. And one of those 6 people is Carolina Escobar-Tello. So I'm very, very excited that she is going to be running this afternoon's session. She lives in Portugal, and they don't fly. So she is going to be running it remotely on here this afternoon. And though that session will be run in school groups, we will put the smaller school groups together so that we can be building plans, real proper plans for the future. And also, of course, this afternoon is run by all of you, our able staff who are helping us to make this happen, and to all of you through your engagement, without which we will get nowhere. So thank you very much to all of you, and I'm excited about today. What we have, before we go into our sessions, is a game of climate bingo. Would you like to just explain how we're going to do this? Shall I start handing out?
I could. So most of you got to meet each other yesterday, so we want to kind of get you to get to know each other better, share some tips. So it's like bingo. I don't know, has any of you played bingo before? So we have a sheet of paper with 3 columns with different behaviors that we engage with. So we encourage you to go and talk to someone you don't really know that well or don't know at all, and ask them to tell you a little bit about if they do study behavior. When you finish a column, a bingo, you can continue going on, or you can stop. But at least top 2, I think, a column of like 7. So at least 7 people.
And all will become clear when you have these sheets, I think. Yep. Let's see how. There we go. There are a few more coming from here as well. Thank you. I think we can unplug now as well.
So stand up and walk around and
Are there any spare?
Huh?
Are there any spare?
No.
Die da brauchen dann noch ein paar. Dankeschön. Cool. Thanks. I love the fact you've done that, because that just now makes it all mingle before we...
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if they're confused about the instructions. They're okay?
That's all right, they'll work it out when they
I
read
love
it.
your speeches. They're like, every time you speak, I'm like, yes.
Is there any more, Maya?
Would you like me to keep recording this bit, or should I cut it
I think
now?
this is good. Thank you very much.